I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. In the shared U.S. federal structure, states control most of what happens within their boundaries, including how land is used. But in almost every state in the United States, land use authority has been delegated to local governments to the point where zoning is seen as the quintessential local government function. But like education segregation 70 years ago, the housing shortage today is demanding state and federal preemption of local zoning law that has prevented the construction of dense housing in close-in suburbs near jobs, transit, and commerce. The White House has suggested a new direction in housing policy. The states of California and Oregon have already taken some steps. And now, Maryland's Governor Wes Moore has proposed a package of bills, one of which opens the door ever so slightly to the possibility of state preemption of local zoning law. The legislature is skeptical. Most legislators come from local governments and espouse local control as inviolable. I called Maryland delegate Vaughn Stewart, the General Assembly's housing guy, and the chair of the Land Use and Ethics Subcommittee, who has to shepherd the state preemption bill through the legislature, about the push and pull of housing reform. Governor Wes Moore's housing bills come up for hearing February 20th. I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are dirty, messy, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from DC area power pop band Dear Daria, whose second EP, Solastalgia, came out January 27th. Mary Jo Matea on vocals, guitar, and keys, Joshua Hunter, guitar, Eamon Donnelly, bass, and Dan ABH on drums. You can find them on Bandcamp at Dear Daria Band. In the news this week, respiratory illness hospitalizations, including COVID, in Maryland is down now to 11.8 per 100,000 population. The previous week, it was 15.8. The threshold for masking for EMS personnel, school nurses, doctors' offices is 10 cases per 100,000 population. The mishandling of the Beidelman sexual harassment scandal finally drew an apology from Montgomery County Board of Education President Carla Silvestri.
We are deeply sorry for the pain that this has caused so many employees and the harm to this district. It has not always listened to its employees, it has not always properly investigated complaints, and it has not created a process that ensures employees will feel free to speak up. We understand that something has been broken in MCPS, and the board will work with MCPS leadership to ensure that what is broken will be fixed. It is time to move toward correcting these actions so that we can move past them. It is time for the school system to heal and to return to its focus to delivering quality education to all its students.
The apology came 2 days ahead of Montgomery County Council's oversight hearing with the school board and MCPS officials on February 8th, and 3 days before the last day for challengers to file paperwork to run against sitting school board members. Things have moved fast since the last of the 3 reports by the Montgomery County Inspector General came out January 23rd. Almost all investigations of the scandal have found that MCPS does not have an adequate method for selecting which complaints to investigate and which not to. School Board President Silvestri, in her remarks, talked about anonymous complaints in particular not being investigated, even when they contained enough information to warrant action. MCPS has also had a policy of deleting emails after a year, which means that the paper trail runs very short. The Inspector General's report demurred in naming then Superintendent Monifa McKnight as having known complaints against Beidelman ahead of time, but said that MCPS had not put in place proper complaint response procedures despite having been told to do so 4 times in prior reports. Anxious for a quick reset, the board pressured then Superintendent McKnight to leave. McKnight hit back, calling the move unjustified. But after a week or so of negotiations that likely involved paying off the rest of her contract, about $1 million, McKnight resigned. Black leaders in the county, including former school board member Jeanette Dixon, NAACP President Linda Plummer, and District 20 State Delegate Janelle Wilkins, publicly criticized the Board of Education for removing the district's first black woman superintendent. The board then very quickly found a 1-for-1 replacement in Monique Felder, another former MCPS principal and official who had left the district in 2014 for leadership positions elsewhere, but was immediately available, having been removed as the superintendent of Orange County Schools in North Carolina by a right-wing school board. Felder was appointed in interim capacity. No sooner was her appointment announced, news came out that Felder had not disclosed a payment from a vendor when she was the chief academic officer at the Metro Nashville School District in Tennessee, going back to 2017. And local blogger Adam Pagnucco did a case search on the Maryland Judiciary Database to find 3 financial claim judgments against her, including a federal tax lien going back to 2006 and 2001. School Board President Silvestri has said that the board is aware of Felder's background. The new interim superintendent, Monique Felder, School Board President Silvestri, Chief Operating Officer Brian Hull, and MCPS Human Resource and Compliance officials April Kay and Stacy Ormsby have set the tone for a reset. The County Council is divided over how much to push the Board of Education. The Council formally asked for an unredacted report from the school board's law firm, Jackson Lewis, which conducted the very first investigation of the Beidelman scandal. Just before the meeting with County Council on February 8th, the school board released a less redacted report from the Jackson Lewis law firm. Council members Evan Glass and Don Lutke pushed to put school board and MCPS officials under oath while at the hearing, but Council President Andrew Friedson has said that he does not want to put them under oath. This is not a witch hunt, he said. In an interview, Councilmember Don Lutke said,
"The council doesn't have the ability to manage the school system. But we do hear from our constituents, and we do know what their pain points are. And we do have a right to know what you're doing with the money that we're authorizing for you to spend, right? So I do think it's definitely within the council's authority to ask probing questions and to expect that the school system will come back before the council at regular intervals. The council should probably collaboratively amongst itself, come up with a list of what we think are expectations for the school system.
Doesn't the Education and Culture Committee of the council already do this?
They do, I think.
So what would be different now?
They tended to have discrete discussions about specific topics, right? So for example, if we're talking about the program to end childhood hunger, and we're talking about lunches within schools, breakfast within schools, and the programmatic changes that they've done there. That's very niche to that one area. But I think above and beyond those types of specialty one-off discussions, it would be good for the Education and Culture Committee to hear from senior leadership within the school system on a regular basis on corrective measures being taken. Not just we're going to take some corrective measures. It's thank you, but I need to know what they are, and we're going to see you back in 30 days to see where you are in the implementation.
What real levers do you have? What if they don't answer the way that you want answers?
You're right. There's been a long-standing tension between the council and the Board of Ed, and how does this all work? And with the public, right? The public has asked a lot of questions. That has been increasing since the passage of the blueprint, because everyone's trying to figure out the mechanisms and the funding and so on and so forth. And that is not unique to Montgomery County. That's something where at the MACO conference this summer, Maryland Association of Counties conference this summer, it was the first meeting I walked into. I actually walked in right behind our county executive, and there were folks there from all 24 counties in that room talking about the same problem, which is to say, we now have to spend a lot of money and have a lot of compliance to make sure we're getting to the blueprint goals. And yet we write the check, but we don't have the oversight. And how are we making sure we're getting to where we need to be on blueprint implementation? Well, blueprint implementation is no different to me than, in this case, corrective action and overhaul of management policies and procedures.
The division within the council means that council members are unlikely to take big decisions to change the balance of power between themselves and the Board of Education. And therefore, the scandal may be blowing over for now. School Board President Silvestri has promised a 90-day report to the County Inspector General, but not yet to the County Council. We've been doing weekly legislative updates. Here is Cecilia Plant of Maryland Legislative Coalition.
Hi, Sunil. We are stepping up on the bill introduction deadlines. So these deadlines are hard and fast for the Senate and the House. And after that deadline, any bills that are submitted have to go through the Rules Committee in order to get a hearing. So most bills that come out after the submission deadlines are almost DOA, unless the leadership of the House or the Senate really wants to move the bill. The Senate introduction deadline is February 5th, and the House introduction deadline is the 9th, which is Friday.
I believe you want to talk about gun control?
Yes, there's two bills that are coming up for hearings in the next couple of weeks. One is the Gun Industry Accountability Act. This is a bill that is trying to take aim at the manufacturers and the sellers and all of the people that import guns into the state, essentially. And it's basically requiring them to put policies in place that ensure that guns won't be trafficked into the state from other places, or sold to straw purchasers, or sold to firearm traffickers, or people who shouldn't have a gun, or people who use a firearm to commit a crime. And so if they don't have these practices in place, then basically it allows the attorney general or an individual to sue them under the public nuisance statute.
What about healthcare?
Okay, healthcare, there's just one bill that I thought was kind of interesting. It is Pharmacy Benefit Manager Bill. It basically is designed to prohibit pharmacy benefit managers from requiring you to use a specific pharmacy for a specialty drug, if the drug is given by your physician, and if it is treating a chronic or a rare or a complex or a life-threatening condition.
Do you have any examples for drugs that happens with?
They don't specifically say in the bill, but I think they're talking cancer drugs and things like that.
All right. You have a bunch of environment bills to talk about.
The first one is the STRIDE Act. The STRIDE Act basically is the Strategic Infrastructure Development and Enhancement Plan. And what it allows is for Washington Gas to accelerate the replacement of pipes for safety and environmental reasons. And this adjustment to that act basically requires them to prioritize the highest risk ones and to consider less costly alternatives in replacing the pipes. The next one is the Warmth Act. Okay, and this one, it's a whole acronym, but basically what it is going to require is for the gas companies to pilot something called networked geothermal energy. So they are required to come up with a pilot for it, and make sure that they actually pick communities that they want to pilot. And basically, networked geothermal it's already being used, I think, up in Massachusetts, and it basically has them dig down not very far and use the geothermal energy in the ground to heat and cool homes. And what Massachusetts has been doing is using the existing pipes that the gas companies have already laid as the conduit for that network geothermal. So it would be, first of all, clean energy. It would reuse the pipes that the gas companies already have laid, and so it would also allow the gas companies to change their business model over into clean energy.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you, Sunil. Have a good one.
That's Cecilia Plant from Maryland Legislative Coalition. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. I'll be back with Maryland Delegate Vaughn Stewart to talk about housing bills in the state assembly. This next song from Dear Daria is called Making a Dime.
Every morning, day after day, it's always the same, never any change. So I am proposing pack up and go, challenge the status quo, and everything we know. You're not making a living if you just work until you die. This can't be how we were meant to spend our lives. Always searching, but we never seem to find
Vaughn Stewart, welcome back to I Hate Politics.
Thank you very much for having me back. I'm excited.
2024 seems like it's shaping up to be a housing session in the Maryland General Assembly, and you are at the center of it all. What is it about this session that makes it the housing session?
I think the governor, he and his administration are the number one reason why people are calling this a housing session. First and foremost, because I think they're maybe the group that coined the phrase. I think if you care about housing affordability at all, you got to be grateful to the governor for just putting this issue on the map.
There is a supply problem, right? And the supply problem has to be met, right? But if you look at the governor's package, the focus is on affordability. Now, I understand that there's a relationship between them. But the supply issue, it has to be tackled.
I do agree with you that housing is fundamentally a supply problem. And I also agree with you that the governor's package, to some degree, sidesteps the issue of market rate housing in favor of focusing on affordability.
The bottom of all this is a supply problem. And if you sidestep the supply issue, then what have you done?
What I've gleaned from talking to folks on his team is that they just meant this to be an opening salvo. They just meant this to be part of a conversation of what bridging this affordability gap looks like. And they want their three bills to pass, obviously, but they also want a number of other bills that legislators have written to pass. And they want this to happen not just this year in the housing session, but they want more bills to pass next year and the year after.
Let's talk about any bill that addresses supply currently.
So I do have a couple of bills that are focused mostly on housing supply. And by a couple, I would say three primarily. So the first is House Bill 3. It's also Senate Bill 356. The Senate sponsor is Anthony Muse, who represents Prince George's County. And it deals directly with an issue that I think has been at the top of mind for a lot of policymakers and stakeholders in Montgomery County over the last couple of years. And that's the speed or lack thereof of the development process itself. And I have two bills that tackle this. The first one is HB 3, and it requires counties to fast track the review of certain types of affordable projects. And a few of the provisions in the governor's bills are somewhat similar to this idea. But there are a number of different nonprofit organizations, and particularly actually houses of worship, religious institutions, churches, synagogues, mosques, who want to build affordable housing on land that they own. But they don't always have the know-how or the expertise to do so, and it's expensive for them to do so. And so what the bill says is that counties need to figure out some way to fast track the development process, the permitting process, when nonprofit organizations want to build affordable housing on their own land. Now, I think this is an important bill. It is a relatively narrow issue. I have another bill on the same topic that's a little bit more broad, and it is House Bill 131. And it requires counties to report information about their permitting processes. We actually, as a state, have a shocking lack of information about how many units that each county is approving per year, what percentage of those are affordable, what percentage is being denied, and what does the timeline look like in each county? How fast are these processes going? We just don't know. There's some disagreement about what the real numbers are for how many housing units Montgomery County has been approving per year. I personally am of the view that the state should take a more muscular role in fostering a climate across the state where we can get more housing supply. And yes, that does mean affordable housing, but I think it means market rate housing as well. And I think that probably means that at some point, Maryland is going to have to preempt counties and municipalities and force changes to zoning laws. I have one other bill on this topic that I previewed, and it's exactly related to the the work that the Housing Opportunities Commission is doing in Montgomery County, and exactly what Zach was talking to you about on this latest episode. And that's HB 7. It's also Senate Bill 203 with Senator Walt Stryker, also of Montgomery County, District 18. And this is called the Housing Innovation Pilot Program Act of 2024. This is a somewhat of a reintroduction. It's similar to bills I've put in the past. And really what it seeks to do is to create state matching dollars for local housing authorities that are doing innovative things in the housing financing space.
Right. And yet the governor's proposal specifically provides for expedited approval of projects that are funded by the low-income housing tax credits, LIHTC, which Montgomery County's Housing Opportunity Commission's Housing Production Fund does not. So, in fact, the governor's package excludes HOC from its ambit.
I said earlier that, I think if you care about housing, and certainly if you care about housing, you're in the state legislature, you're really grateful to Governor Moore about what he's done here to put housing at the forefront of his agenda. At the same time, that does not mean that the legislature is going to be a rubber stamp for his ideas. It's hard to predict exactly what any three of his bills or my bills are going to look like at the end of 90 days, because we've got a committee process in my committee. We've got a new committee chair who's going to be looking at this stuff, Mark Corman. And we also have this whole other legislative chamber that sometimes I like to forget about, the state Senate.
Right. It's almost like nobody talked to Zach Marks or you before they put the package together.
I can assure you they've talked to me, but I also can assure you that they've talked to Zach Marks because I actually set up a few of those meetings.
Well, then, they didn't hear.
I think the governor's perspective is pretty simple, that I think that they have had their own research. And I think even Secretary Jake Day was talking about this on Twitter the other day. I think they just strongly believe that targeting the most, targeting affordable units gives you the most bang for your buck, I think is their broad position. At the same time, you got to understand that in Annapolis, there are a lot of voices who disagree with us on a lot of these issues just fundamentally. And they don't necessarily believe in any new market rate development on the one hand. And they certainly don't believe that the state has any role in dictating local land use and zoning policy at all. And those voices are pretty loud, and they're in both political parties. And so I think the governor is, he's trying to do, I think, the best he can to put something on the table that can actually pass, knowing that it's a really challenging political climate.
Maybe the question to ask is, what is the best way to get affordability? Is it by requiring it, as the governor and his team want to do, or taking a broader, more market-based approach, so deregulating and allowing building activity to happen?
The problem is so widespread that I don't think that there is actually just one route that you take. I've always maintained that I believe in an all of the above approach to this.
That's not what is in the package, is what I'm saying. Matt Iglesias said this. You can't have housing reform without actually increasing housing supply. If you don't build more, it's not reforming.
Yeah. So, I think that there's a private role to build more. And I think there's a public role to build more. And so I think in the private sector, what we've seen work in other places is relaxing zoning requirements and creating housing targets for counties to meet. And I think both of those options should be on the table in this legislative session and in future legislative sessions. And just because they're not in the governor's housing package doesn't mean that they're not going to be considered by the legislature. Now, I also think, especially here we are on the heels of I think your great interview with Zach, is that the public sector has a role to play. Because just as I refute voices that say that the private sector should not be part of this, I also push back against those people that say that this is just a simple supply and demand economics 101 problem that can only be solved by the private sector. If it could only be solved by the private sector, then I think in a lot of ways our task would be easier. But I think that subsidy is going to be necessary. And I think that public building, I'm a big believer in public building, and especially with what HOC is doing with public-private partnerships. I think that the state absolutely has a more muscular role to play than simply letting the market go wild after maybe loosening some regulations.
Now, the Housing and Community Development Financing Act of 2024, which is the other bill in Governor Moore's housing package, establishes a Maryland Community Investment Corporation that is going to use the new market tax credits. My concern is this isn't large enough until the state puts in real money.
It'll be interesting to see what this entity looks like at the end of the legislative process. Just because the governor puts together a housing package with great talking points that are well thought out, that we're broadly excited about, doesn't mean they're going to pass it all. In fact, I think a lot of people are worried that maybe one or two of these bills will go down. And number two, it doesn't mean that it's going to pass in at all the same form. In fact, I would say I'd be shocked if the version that we have in front of us today is the version that actually comes out cleanly on sine die. I would be absolutely blown away by that. If you think about it that way, and you really think about all these bills as just the first draft, I think that he's done an interesting thing here to put this idea on the table. And it makes me think, how can the legislature, how can my subcommittee, how can my committee, and how can the entire House and General Assembly, how can we tweak this to maybe improve it? For example, could we add some amendments? It'd be interesting to think about if we could add some amendments to make this community development entity that he's put together really just conceptualizing around applying for new markets tax credit. But what if we instead tweaked it to make it a little bit more of like a macro HOC that could buy, acquire, build real estate and could float its own bonds, or could provide financing to many housing financing authorities like HOC. I don't think that would be necessarily a outlandish expansion of the duties of this community development entity that he's thought about, but I think it would be really interesting to have that discussion.
I want to talk about what the opposition is to housing reform. Speak to who opposes these things.
So if you look at the accessory dwelling unit bill that the Montgomery County Council passed a couple of years ago, and you looked at the opposition to that bill, now it ultimately did pass unanimously, but it did engender a lot of opposition. And most of the opposition was what some people derisively would refer to as NIMBY type of rhetoric, which is to say, this is going to affect the fabric of the neighborhood. This is going to lead to more traffic. The infrastructure can't keep up with this. This is going to overcrowd the schools. This is going to ruin my view. This is going to affect my quality of life. That was the core, the sort of traditional arguments that folks use against new housing were the arguments deployed at the county level against the accessory dwelling unit bill. But when I put in a bill to legalize duplexes and triplexes in a variety of different areas a few sessions ago, I didn't hear any of those concerns at all. I didn't hear a single person at the hearing. I don't think I got a single email from any of those types of usual suspects that tend to flood county level meetings. And I don't know if they just didn't know I was doing it, or they, not familiar with Annapolis politics, but I didn't hear that at all. And instead, that opposition migrated into a discussion about what is and is not the proper role of the state government on this issue.
The trouble with that argument is that when things break down, such as prior to the Kirwan Commission, the breakdown of education, the coming issues with transportation funding, given what we know, that the advocates of local control are far more superior, far more organized than housing advocates are, then how do you expect to win?
We went decades in Annapolis where just the common sense was that the state, yes, did delegate local zoning powers to counties and municipal government, and that's just the way it should be. Almost like it was written somewhere in the Old Testament, like counties, thou shalt have zoning power. And that's just how everyone thought, and no one ever really poked that consensus. And for an institution like a state legislature, well, our farm team in the Maryland General Assembly, just like I assume in pretty much every state legislature in the country, our farm team, meaning where we get our recruits, are predominantly from the ranks of local and county government. And their first taste of political power and influence was as a local and county government official, which means that a lot of them have firsthand, they felt the pangs of preemption. And they think it's unfair when the state steps in and either gives them an unfunded mandate or tells them they can and can't do that. The people, and I think on the other side, a lot of folks care about housing, but I think that a lot of folks care about a particular part of it, and they're siloed, and those groups don't necessarily all talk to each other. So there's a chunk of sort of pro-housing advocates, for lack of a better term, who care a lot about public housing, and they cheer on HOC. They've got Zach Mark posters, hopefully Von Stewart posters, but definitely Zach Mark posters in their bedroom. And that's their number one issue. And they come and testify on my bill, and they gleefully share New York Times articles about HOC. Then you have a second group that I think is by far the most well organized, which are tenant advocates that care principally about the plight of renters. And that's a group that I have a lot of common cause with, and I've worked really closely with over the years. I've got a bill this session, for example, to make it easier for people to try to enforce their right to habitability, meaning their right to safe and decent housing that's free from mold and rodents. And so that is an entity of tenant advocates. They have an umbrella organization called Renters United Maryland. 10 years ago, that was an extremely weak group. And through the hard work of a lot of folks and a lot of organizations, they have gone from a group that was very novice and green in the area of state politics to a really muscular and powerful and sophisticated force that has been able to push forward a lot of really interesting bills, including the first right to counsel bill in the country a few years ago. Last year, Delegate Janelle Wilkins and I, along with Senator Guy Gazzoni, pushed forward a second in the nation proposal to create a state level housing voucher program that complements the federal Section 8 program. So there's been a lot of victories in the tenant space. Now, still a lot of ways to go. And of course, Governor Moore, one of his 3 bills in his housing package has to do with renters. But that's your second group. And they don't necessarily talk to the folks that much who are in favor of more affordable housing or public housing supply. And I would put it maybe in that first camp along with Zach Marks. I'd put maybe the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition, which are nonprofit developers who also are supply oriented, but are most focused on affordable housing supply. And then third, you'd have your typical kind of YIMBY, yes, in my backyard forces, who, while I think a lot of them, most of them, maybe all of them, really like HOC, and most of them, maybe even almost all of them, really like renter safeguards, but they're most principally focused on building up market rate housing. And this is your greater Washingtons of the world, et cetera. And they, I think, are still pretty nascent in their political journey in Annapolis. I think they've built a lot of power in other state houses, and I think they've built some power in Montgomery County on the local level, but I think they've still got some room to grow at the state level. And I think if all those groups got together and all worked on each other's issues, they'd be a more powerful force than the common wisdom of local control. But they don't really necessarily talk very much. I know a lot of folks, including myself, have tried to fix that problem, but it's not something that can be solved overnight.
So one of the bills in the governor's package has mention of manufactured homes being, and I think the issue is being able to put manufactured homes in single family zoning. Is that correct, or am I misreading
Yeah, that's
this?
right. That's right. So his provision is to basically to be able to treat manufacturers, sometimes people call them modular homes, as stick-built housing.
The idea is to include mobile homes, right?
Well, they're not, I mean, it's not so much mobile homes like we think of mobile homes. I actually had a bill last session on mobile homes, basically mobile home parks,
Right.
making it harder for private equity entities to buy these things and either change the use or to jack up the rent. So we do have a problem of mobile homes. I think they're really thinking about it more in terms of like modular housing.
How do you distinguish modular homes from a mobile home?
Typically the movability. So what I would refer to as a mobile home, maybe there's a better description of it, is more of something that you can drive around and is not necessarily public. And you generally, in a mobile home park, you own the home and you lease the ground underneath it.
I want to understand if they're including the mobile homes within their...
The definition of manufactured homes only applies to the manufactured homes that are converted to real property and then attached to a foundation. So they could have been mobile homes at one point, but they do have to be attached to the ground. I believe that what they're trying to do is ensure that the permitting process for manufactured homes is identical in all single family areas to stick built housing.
If anything, this is quite revolutionary. Let's talk a little bit about the renters' bills. After rent stabilization, I think the habitability issue is the most important one. So, in your bill, what are you proposing? Are you allowing for rent to be deposited into escrow while things are bad in an apartment?
The core problem here is that you have very few code enforcement departments with any real funding across the state. And so without folks from the county governments going into units to make sure that they're up to code and they're up to standards, we are reliant on tenants complaining or filing suit in order for them to enforce their right. And so in Maryland, everyone has an implied right to habitability. Everyone in Maryland has an implied right to habitability. And that's the case in every state. But it's really difficult to enforce that right because you generally do have to file what's called a rent escrow action, where you put your money into escrow rather than paying it to your landlord. But there are a lot of barriers to this process. First and foremost, you've got to actually know that it exists. You've got to oftentimes hire an attorney if you want to have any hope of winning. What I'm trying to do is reform the rent escrow process to make it easier on people. So what the bill does is it first codifies that right to habitability. So it's in Maryland code. And number two, it clarifies that what are called joinder rules to make it clear that if tenants have common issues across a building, they're all experiencing the same problems in the same way, then they can file a collective mass action against their landlord together. I will say the other housing issue that I'm most excited about is one of my own, which is that we are going to try to create a new rental assistance program. So the context here is that over the last couple of years, Maryland received about $700 million from the federal government in emergency rental assistance funds in the wake of the pandemic. And that money was extremely useful to hundreds of thousands of Marylanders. It kept people in their homes who would have otherwise been on the streets, undoubtedly. And there was a little bit of hiccups in terms of the administration with the counties, but eventually the counties ran these programs like well-oiled machines for the most part. But it's all gone. And it's not going to be replaced by the federal government. And in this last year's budget, we had, I think, a total of maybe $2 million. These are not normal fiscal times in Maryland. We do have a structural deficit, and legislators are looking for places to cut and places to tax. They're not looking at places to spend. The one place the legislators are looking to preserve, and especially members of the House of Delegates has made a priority, is protecting the blueprint for Maryland's future. And so I thought that the natural place to park this rental assistance program, both for the political reason of this is still a huge priority of the state to keep this commitment to our educators and to our public school students, but also just to make sure the blueprint is successful, is marrying rental assistance with community schools. So we already have a well-known problem in this country where housing stability and educational outcomes are very closely linked. There's a lot of very interesting data on this. Eviction is always violent, but it's especially violent when you're talking about families with children who have to now leave their school and be separated from their close friends and from role models in the form of educators or principals. It's also really disruptive for principals and teachers because their classrooms in September might not look a whole lot like their classroom in March. But so this is a well-known problem, and there's been a lot of ink spilt on this subject. But the problem gets bigger when you add community schools into the mix, because Maryland, as part of the blueprint, is funding community schools at historic levels. These are schools that are for low-income kids. They're typically in low-income areas, and they provide wraparound support services for students and their families. This can be things like fresh food and grocery. It can be things like healthcare, dental care, mental health care, et cetera.
So you're taking some of the money from community schools and attaching it to rental assistance as part of that?
No, we're going to create a new funding stream. It's fresh money. We're not going to take any money from the existing blueprint, but we're going to try to get at least $10 million a year added to the blueprint for the purposes of rental assistance in community schools. I'm hoping that this sort of community schools tie-in will work and will happen, and will hopefully be the start of, us bolstering support for rental assistance down the road, so that we can, to summarize our conversation a little bit, so that we can put our money where our mouth is on all these different subjects. Because I truly do not believe we're going to solve this housing crisis broadly. We're not going to make housing a human right, as it were, if we don't address market rate supply, public supply, rental stability, rental habitability, all in one fell swoop. And it's a lot to do, but what gives me hope is that this conversation in Annapolis has never been bigger. This was a topic when I came to Annapolis in 2019 and started putting in a bunch of housing bills. People kind of looked at me like I was crazy. And now this idea and this issue is really mainstream. And even if some of the bills don't go as far as you or I would like, it's still really gratifying to know that progress is being made and that we're putting one foot in front of the other.
Vaughn Stewart, good luck in the session.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. I'll be back with the wrap-up of my conversation with Maryland delegate Vaughn Stewart.
Consume all the knowledge, those who went before, who opened up the door, ones you can't ignore. Step outside your comfort zone and you may see that there is more than just one way to be.
You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. What lessons should we draw from my conversation on housing with Maryland House Delegate and Land Use and Ethics Subcommittee Chair Vaughn Stewart? Stewart, who is from District 19 in Montgomery County, is the housing guy in the state legislature and finds himself and his agenda vindicated by Governor Westmore uplifting housing policy to never-before prominence. He is also in not so enviable a position of having to shepherd the governor's and his own bills through the legislature, where the opposition is not going to come from housing activists, but rather from legislators who have spent time in local government before and value the principle of county and local control over zoning matters. This is the Old Testament, as Vaughn Stewart called it, not even the new one. These delegates and senators now have to agree that the state should be able to compel counties to allow multifamily apartment buildings and mobile homes attached to foundations in single-family zoning. Many probably fear themselves, and certainly will hear from their constituents, that allowing a mix of housing in their neighborhoods will reduce their property values. And these legislators will have to rise above this pressure to pass these bills. The Maryland Association of Counties, MACO, the powerful lobby group of county governments, is duty-bound to try to preserve the prerogatives of the counties themselves. I have heard that MACO is negotiating with the Moore administration and Housing Secretary Jake Day to make the bills more acceptable to counties. Meanwhile, on the other side, housing activists are divided into two pitched groups that can't seem to come together. The rent control faction wants to regulate housing and rents and the urbanist faction wants to unleash the market to increase the supply of new homes so that home prices can stabilize. Each group believes the other is the problem. Rent stabilization and control proponents, often at the receiving end of landlords, believe that property owners will exploit renters if they can. But urbanists believe that any form of rent stabilization discourages the supply of housing and is therefore counterproductive. Rent activists believe urbanists are in cahoots with developers, and urbanists believe rent activists are ignorant tools of rich homeowners wanting to preserve their own property values. The best hope the Moore administration and Von Stewart may have is to craft narrow legislation so finely balanced that both sides can come together on some specific objectives without having to agree on broad principles. Moore's housing secretary, Jake Day, comes with impeccable credentials from his time as mayor of the city of Salisbury, where Day enabled a major expansion in housing supply in his city. He should be able to cash in on some of that reputation, but instead, he slipped in a Twitter conversation over the issue of research showing that targeting affordability produces more affordable housing. The academic and policy literature disagrees with the conclusion, and it is now on the housing secretary to share his analysis publicly. The more bill drafts are likely to change. The most difficult bill, which compels affordable housing to be built in single-family zoning areas, may even fail this year. But Von Stewart is right about this. 2024 is the first year that a state administration has even tried its hand at housing policy. What this opening will do is to concentrate urbanist focus on Maryland, and organizations such as Greater Washington and Center for Smarter Growth will organize lobbying efforts at the state level. In that sense, it is already the housing session in Annapolis. That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, and assistant producers Daniel Galileo and Katarina Gasek, with support from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from DC area power pop band Dear Daria, whose second EP, Solastalgia, came out January 27th. Mary Jo Matea on vocals, guitar, and keys, Joshua Hunter, guitar, Eamon Donnelly, bass, and Dan ABH on drums. You can find them on Bandcamp at Dear Daria Band. We are going out with the Dear Daria song, On the Inside. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Still need to go fetch the mail, wash your clothes, clean up the house, get to bed so you can do it all